For years, the startup world has been completely obsessed with one mythical creature, the unicorn. But what if the real key to survival, especially in a tough environment, isn't some magical horse, but a much more resilient animal? Let's dive into why, in the Gulf's booming tech scene, it actually pays to be a camel. So, right off the bat, we're looking at a fundamental clash of strategies. The unicorn, that's all about explosive, cash-burning growth, always with an eye on global domination. But the camel, it's built for endurance. It's got this laser focus on cash discipline and fitting perfectly into its home market. I mean, these are two totally different philosophies for how to build a business. And we all know the formula, right? It's been beamed into every corner of the globe from Silicon Valley. The mantra is pretty simple. Grow as fast as you possibly can, spend whatever it takes to get users, and just don't even worry about making a profit until you're absolutely massive. It's the whole blitz scaling playbook. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. Despite a ton of capital, a lot of government support, and a population that's super digitally savvy, this copy-paste model has, for the most part, completely failed in the Gulf. Startups that were built on these foreign ideas have really struggled just to find their footing, let alone survive. So the big question is, why? What was the issue? It definitely wasn't a lack of talent or a lack of ambition. The problem was a fundamental mismatch. You see, the Gulf isn't one giant market like the US. It's a bunch of unique countries, and each one has its own rules, its own consumer habits, its own labor laws. What works in a huge, uniform market just breaks when you face that kind of fragmentation. The Silicon Valley key just didn't fit the local lock. So the failure of that old model really paved the way for something new, a creature that's perfectly adapted to the unique desert climate of the Gulf's economy. So let's meet the camel. And this definition is really key. Unlike the unicorn, the camel is not chasing growth at any cost. No way. It's all about sustainable, profitable growth. So the focus shifts from just getting big to the actual fundamentals. Managing your cash flow, controlling your own operations, and making dead sure your business is perfectly in sync with the local environment. And this just lays out the differences so clearly. I mean, look at the goals. Unicorns want the whole world. Camels just want sustainable margins. And how they spend. Unicorns burn through cash on aggressive user acquisition. Camels are all about strict cash discipline. And profitability, well, for a unicorn, that's a problem for another day. For a camel, it's absolutely essential from day one. Their key assets are totally different too. Software for the unicorn versus real operational control and trust for the camel. All right, so this all sounds great in theory, but how does it actually work in the real world? Let's check out 3 fantastic case studies of real commercial startups from Qatar and Kuwait that absolutely nailed this approach. So first up is Snoonu. Now, they jumped into a delivery market in Qatar that was already a complete battlefield. You had these huge global players just throwing money around, offering massive discounts to win over customers. Honestly, by any traditional playbook, Snoonu was late to the party and seriously underfunded. A unicorn in their position would have tried to raise a giant pile of cash and just out-discount the competition, and probably would have burned out in the process. But Snoonu was a camel, so what was their big strategic pivot? They just completely ignored the price wars. They got it. They understood that in Qatar's climate, reliability matters way more than a small discount. So they invested in their own delivery fleet, and this gave them total control over the quality of their service. They weren't just delivering food, they became this super reliable concierge service for pretty much anything you might need. They competed on quality, not on cost. Okay, next up, let's look at Boutiqaat in Kuwait. Western e-commerce giants, like Amazon, they're built on this idea that you trust the platform itself. But Boutiqaat recognized a super important local insight. In the Gulf, trust isn't institutional, it's personal. You trust people you know, people you admire. So how do you build a huge e-commerce business when people don't really trust algorithms? They trust relationships. Well, you don't try to change the culture, you build your business around it. Their solution was absolutely genius. They built a platform for social influencers, giving each one their own digital storefront. So commerce wasn't organized around a search bar, it was organized around trusted personalities. They basically harnessed the region's existing social networks to drive sales. And in doing so, they turned a cultural nuance into an incredible competitive advantage. And for our final example, CWallet, they looked at the financial landscape in Qatar and saw something everyone else was just overlooking. While most fintech companies were chasing after wealthy customers, millions of migrant workers, the actual backbone of the economy, were stuck using cash. Now again, the typical startup might look at this group and think, oh, that's too difficult or it's not profitable enough. But CWallet saw a real, unaddressed need of the majority. So how they build a business to serve them? They built a product for the practical, everyday needs of this huge underserved population, a really simple digital wallet to get their salaries, pay their bills, and send money back home. And crucially, they worked hand in hand with regulators from the very beginning, prioritizing stability and compliance over everything. They turned a structural feature of the local labor market into a scalable business. So, what do these three really different companies, a delivery service, an e-commerce platform, and a fintech wallet, all have in common? Well, the takeaway is powerful, and it's simple. Context is everything. They all followed a pretty similar playbook. First, they focused on actually making money on each transaction from the very start. Second, they embraced local constraints, like Snoonu with the climate, or a CWallet with regulation, and they turned them into advantages. Third, they understood that in this market, trust and reliability are the real growth drivers, just like Boutiqaat did with influencers. And maybe most importantly, they just refused to copy a model that happened to work somewhere else. This quote just nails it. It really captures the entire spirit of the Camel approach. The path to victory isn't about being a lesser version of some Silicon Valley giant. No, it's about being the absolute best version of a business that's built for its own specific environment, solving real, local problems. And that brings us to the final question, and this one's for you. You know, every market, every industry has its own unique quirks and constraints and cultural details that outsiders might just see as problems. The Camel mindset asks you to see them differently. So what's that local reality in your world that maybe everyone else overlooks? Because that right there, that might just be your greatest advantage.